My name is Elian, and I'm 43. I work for a multinational company that's into telecommunications with a wide range of coverage all over the United States, Canada, and the Caribbean. I want to share my revenge story, how I paid my cheating wife with the same measure she had been doling out to me and even more, and how I got satisfied by that. As an electronic engineer, I joined this telecommunications company after working for 5 years at an electronic firm in the United States. I had gained a great deal of experience and deployed these experiences shortly after I started working with this company. Gradually, they noticed my prowess and expertise and gave me the leeway to rise through the ranks, becoming one of their finest staff. Eventually, I began to represent the company on both the national and international stages. Meanwhile, I had a wife named Lucia and a beautiful daughter named Catherine. I and Lucia had been married for the past 9 years. She did have a little challenge conceiving, despite how hard we tried. But thank goodness, after persevering and receiving some medical help, she was able to finally conceive and give birth to Catherine, who is 5 years old at the moment. We did have a warm and wonderful life that was full of excitement and fun. Whenever I was in town, I made sure we had no boring moments at all. We went out for the movies, played card games, visited the beach, or explored a new playground. Both Lucia and Catherine love it when we go on these outings and always look forward to when I take them out. Lucia worked as a part-time staffer at the front desk of a 5-star hotel in town. She only goes to work 3 times a week. In other words, she spends most of her time at home, doing the chores and making sure Catherine is good both in school and at home. I do help her out sometimes with the chores, and also by either taking Catherine to school or bringing her back from school. Being a front desk staff member, Lucia had met and interacted with all kinds of guests who'd visited the hotel. I am strictly referring to male guests in this regard. She had countless times told me about some of these guests who came around to lodge in their hotel, how they secretly made advances and tried to win them over with gifts and all that. Some of them get to hand out their call cards, asking them to keep in touch. Quickly, I tried to educate her about the implications of that. I explained that most of the hotels I've ever known prohibit their employees from socializing with hotel guests, and it is also strictly against their policies to share or exchange any personal information with hotel guests. I told her that, in order not to get herself into trouble, she should totally stay away from such interactions. I never knew she took my advice with a pinch of salt. I was completely oblivious to the fact that something was already brewing between her and a young man who had been their guest for a while now. Like I mentioned earlier, I have represented my company on both the national and international stages and have traveled countless times for delegations. At one time, I traveled for a 3-day delegation to Vancouver, one of those Canadian cities where we had our establishment, and when I finally returned home, we all sat in the sitting room to watch cartoons, just to keep Catherine entertained and happy. While we watched on, Catherine suddenly exclaimed when a character in the cartoon said, "Exquisite eyes and hair," she said. "That's what Mummy's friend tells me anytime he comes around." It struck me like a lightning bolt the moment she mentioned he. For a moment, I wondered who that was. And then I immediately asked Lucia to probably help me understand who or what Catherine was trying to talk about. With a fake smile on her face, Lucia told me Catherine was referring to one of her coworkers who had come around to check on her. Lucia's answer did not really sink in well in my mind, because going by the impression Catherine gave, it appeared to be more than just a one-time visit. Anyway, we continued with our cartoon, and I waved off the thoughts that accompanied that seeming revelation and everything around it. Soon enough, I had to leave for another delegation that would last a week. On the second day of the delegation, I was in my hotel room when the thought of Catherine flashed through my mind. I was already missing her badly, and I thought of quickly putting a call through to them, at least to hear her voice, before I dashed out of my room for the afternoon meeting. Immediately, I put the call across. Lucia picked up the call, and we got talking. But I couldn't really get to hear her well due to the noise I heard in the background. Catherine was crying and screaming really loud. Then, surprisingly, I heard another voice, but this time around, it was a male voice, ordering Catherine to go to sleep. He was so firm and hasty as he ordered my daughter to go to sleep. Catherine kept on screaming, calling Daddy, Daddy. I got mad and boiled like hot water within my mind. I had wished I could immediately develop wings and fly down home to find out what exactly was going on there. I was so concerned for Catherine, but I was only left with the option of asking Lucia about her whereabouts. Why is Catherine screaming so hard? I demanded from Lucia. She is so obstinate and has refused to go to bed, she claimed. I reminded her that it's barely afternoon, and the last time I checked, Catherine only goes to bed in the evening hours. Lucia retorted by saying it was only during the weekdays. She quickly reminded me that it was a Saturday and Catherine had been awake since morning. I told her not to force her to sleep since she doesn't feel like sleeping. Then I went ahead and asked about the male voice I was hearing in the background, ordering Catherine to go to sleep. She immediately denied that there was anyone with them in the house. But surprisingly, the voice suddenly came aloud again, telling Catherine, go and sleep, go and sleep. Lucia quickly hung up the phone. When I tried to reconnect, her phone rang and rang, but she refused to pick up the call. 5 minutes later, she called me back to argue her point, claiming that there was no man with her in the house. She accused me of imagining things and said she deserved an apology for that. I quickly apologized, but told her to make sure she takes proper care of Catherine. I did apologize because I wanted to take her by surprise. I decided to play the fool so I could finally mess her and her so-called lover up. A few days later, I was back at home. I secretly interviewed Catherine in the best way I could to find out some truths about Lucia's alleged affair with this guy. I bought Catherine her favorite candy and drink and talked with her about why we drove back home from school. When I tried to ascertain what happened on Saturday in my absence, she was a little bit scared to speak up. I pressed harder and she still kept mute. I could sense she was observing an instruction. I tried to tease her and talk her into opening up by promising her something she really liked. Suddenly, she revealed that her mom had warned her never to tell Daddy. I assured her that she was going to be fine and that her mom was just kidding. Tell me why you cried and screamed aloud the other day, I demanded softly. She said, Mummy's friend came to the house every day, and on that particular Saturday. When she had wanted to play with her doll, he came around and asked her to go to bed. But she refused and said she didn't feel like sleeping. He angrily took her doll and hid it somewhere. She went further to reveal that after he took her doll from her, he and her mummy entered the living room and shut her out in the sitting room, all alone. And her mummy consented to that. When she went to knock at the door, her mom opened the door and was talking on the phone while her friend kept urging her to go to sleep. Finally, she ended by saying the said friend of her mom had removed all his clothes along with her. She really did not explicitly tell me all these things. I just had to paraphrase everything she told me that afternoon while we drove back home. I was really confused and surprised at the same time. I was wondering where all this was coming from. Who could this so-called coworker be that had the guts to come under my roof and sleep with my wife and order my daughter around? I decided to find out more about this whole development. I remembered some time ago that I did exchange contact with one of Lucia's colleagues, Nancy. I quickly searched for her number and put a call through to her. Surprisingly, she was happy to hear from me and said she had been looking for a way to reach me for a while now because she had accidentally lost my contact information. Quickly, we scheduled an appointment and met later in the day somewhere in town. She told me she had been trying to reach me secretly to tell me about what she had observed about Lucia. Without hesitating or mincing words, she also revealed that Lucia has been going out with one of their guests for a while now, which is totally against the policy of the hotel, and that she stands the chance of getting herself into trouble. When I tried to know how long this had been, she said it's been over 4 months now since she started going out with the guest. Nancy claimed she secretly got his contacts, and he had followed her home on several occasions. She somehow got to know that this guy came all the way from Malaysia for his business. I thanked her for divulging this information to me. I then began to plot my revenge mission. First, I thought about how to catch them red-handed and then teach them the lessons of their lives. I called Nancy again to see if the guy was in town. Unfortunately, he wasn't. I tried to find out approximately how long he stays in town whenever he comes around. She said approximately a week, and sometimes he stays even longer than that. I told her to let me know once he was in town. I pretended to Lucia as though everything was all right and patiently waited for Nancy's call. Just a week later, Nancy called to let me know the guy was in town and would be staying for more than a week. A lot of thoughts ran through my mind at the same time. I was thinking of the best strategy to implore them to burst up and pay them in their own coin, since he will be staying for more than a week. I kept my cool and took things gradually. Coincidentally, I received a call from my office to leave for an emergency delegation first thing the next day. I was kind of disappointed and tried to look for ways to evade that, but it just could not happen. I told Lucia about the trip, and she was very excited and wished me a safe trip. I told Catherine to tell me everything she might possibly observe in my absence by the time I returned. The following day, I was off for the delegation. When I got there, I was shocked to find out that our partners and associates could not turn up for the treaty as agreed. I was left with no option but to turn back home. I joined the first flight the following day and was back home during the afternoon hours. I boarded a taxi home. When I got home, I took out my keys, opened the door, and walked in. I was surprised when I saw Catherine sleeping awkwardly on the sofa. I never knew anyone was in the house. Immediately, I went close to her to check if she was still breathing. Fortunately, she was. But then I noticed her favorite drink was just beside her, and it appeared she had barely taken 1 or 2 sips out of it. The living room was open, and I immediately walked in, only to find a man buried in between Lucia's legs. Both of her eyes were closed while he performed with every ounce of strength he had. Immediately, I flew on the bed and pounced on them, and they tried to jump off each other. But I laid hard on them as I angrily punched both of them all over their bodies. Lucia screamed at the top of her voice when she noticed I was the one. I grabbed the man by his long hair and nodded at him with my head, and he fell on the bed and shouted for help. He begged me not to kill him. I demanded to know who gave him the guts to come harass and maltreat Catherine under my roof. "Who are you?" I demanded in fury. He said he was a guest from Malaysia. I assured him I was going to deal with him mercilessly and that he'd never get back to Malaysia. Lucia kept on screaming and begging me as I furiously talked with him and beat him up. Then I asked, why is Catherine lying awkwardly like that? Why has she not finished her drink? Lucia stared at me, speechless and lying, and then turned to look at her Malaysian lover. Immediately, I knew something was fishy. As a matter of fact, they just confirmed my premonitions. "What did you give her?" I yelled at him. He kept silent and steered toward the floor. Then Lucia spoke up with a brittle voice. "He sedated her drink in order to make her sleep." When I heard that, I grabbed him by his long hairs again and smashed his face on the wall, breaking his chin in the process. He immediately fell to the floor and started shaking as though he were about to pass on. Lucia started screaming out loud, accusing me of murdering her lover. Immediately, I called for an emergency team, and they came around with their ambulance and took him to the hospital. I never wanted to go along with them. Immediately, I turned to Lucia and lashed out at her. "What in the world did you think you were doing? Bringing a man I never knew from Adam to my house to defile our matrimonial bed. And as though that was not enough, you joined him to harass and intimidate Catherine up to the extent of sedating her. Are you out of your mind or something? This is nothing but absolute profanity and an abuse of Catherine's fundamental rights. You should be ashamed of yourself." Suddenly, she fell to the floor and started crying and sobbing. She confessed that she started cheating on me right from the moment she told me about some of their guests making advances to them and handing them their call cards, and I advised her to be careful. She said she was only telling me that as a cover-up, so I wouldn't suspect her. She went on to say that when she met with her Malaysian lover, he promised to give her everything she could ever dream of. He assured her that he was a billionaire businessman and had everything she could possibly think of. They clandestinely began to have casual sex in his room when she went there under the guise of housekeeping. Gradually, she took him to the house where they settled down for sex any time he came around. Catherine was his only headache. She revealed that little Catherine had vehemently objected to their affair and was even scared of him due to his weird bears and long hair, but they gradually forced her to accept his continual presence. Despite their efforts, the little girl was always at loggerheads with their folly. Finally, she said he promised to marry her if only she could file for divorce and break up with me. She told him she lacked the guts to do that because I'd never offended her or been abusive to her in the past. He insisted she think about it and let him know once she made up her mind. She told him they could only go on with their illicit affair and advised him to forget about the issue of getting married to each other. Immediately, I told her, "You finally got him all to yourself. You are free to go marry him and spend the rest of your life with him." When I said that, she begged me not to divorce her. She claimed she did not succumb to his idea of divorce because she loved me dearly. I assured her that if she really loved me, she wouldn't have cheated on me at all. She talked more about allowing him to harass our only child and daughter. I told her I was filing for divorce forthwith, and she would have to sign the divorce documents in a court of competent jurisdiction while her entire family watched on. In her presence, I scheduled an appointment with my lawyer. I also went ahead and called her parents to let them know about my decision and the rationale behind it. Surprisingly, her dad picked up a verbal fight with me and said I was only accusing his daughter of cheating on me without any evidence. He assured me that was not going to happen as long as he was alive. I got offended by his attitude and told him he probably might end up marrying his daughter by the time the matter was adjudicated in court, and I immediately hung up the phone. I met with my lawyer and explained the whole matter to him. He asked me about any evidence I could provide, and I assured him that Catherine would testify about everything that transpired in court. He gave me a date for the hearing and trial, and I conveyed the same to her parents and family members. Soon enough, it was the day for both the hearing and trial, and we all converged in the courtroom. Lucia's parents and other family members were present. I presented my case before the jury when he asked to hear from me, and then it was time for Lucia to speak. She stood speechless, and then her dad stood up to get her talking, but she couldn't say a word. He was disappointed and took his seat in shame. The jury asked me to provide evidence to support my claims. Quickly, I beckoned for Catherine to walk up to the jury box, and they immediately handed her a microphone to speak. She got nervous at the beginning and could not speak articulately. So I held her close to my side, and suddenly she regained her confidence and told the court everything that had transpired in the best way she could. Even though her statements weren't too coherent, the judge and everyone in the court, including Lucia's dad, could deduce the truth from her statements and suddenly got emotional. I turned and looked at Lucia's dad as he buried his head in shame and disappointment. Finally, the jury asked Lucia if she pleaded guilty or not, based on my accusations and the evidence Catherine had provided. With tears in her eyes and a quivering voice, she pleaded guilty. Then the judge delivered the following judgments. 1. We were to go our separate ways. 2. She was denied having Catherine in her custody, going by the fact that she aided and supported her harassment and maltreatment by her lover. The court session soon came to a halt, and everyone dispersed. Lucia packed her things to join her parents, and I stayed with Catherine. Soon enough, the news of Lucia's infidelity with a guest in the hotel got to the management. She was sacked with immediate effect and had to pay for other damages and infractions she incurred. She became dejected and frustrated, having a really hard time securing another job. She developed high blood pressure as a result, which nearly took her life. To this day, she has to depend on drugs from time to time to slow her blood pressure when it goes up.